Hello and welcome to Down to Earth Convos Down Under, episode 30. In this episode, Dr Kathryn Murray joins Ali to walk us through and explain 4 different parenting approaches: Authoritarian, Authoritative, Permissive, and Uninvolved.
Good morning, Dr Kathryn Murray. How are you today?
Morning, Ali. So nice to speak to you again. It's been a little while since we've last chatted, so it's so nice to catch up with you today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and what you're going to be sharing today. I'm very excited. Kathryn, what I'd love to do is introduce you formally for our listeners, who I may remind you are parents. And after I read your bio, you'll probably find our parents that might want to be tuning into this might be those who have younger children. So I'm very excited to have you here today. So Dr. Kathryn Murray is a passionate parenting and early childhood consultant. Her organisation, Future Strong Education, supports educators and parents globally. Kathryn has been a classroom teacher, a university lecturer, conference presenter, keynote speaker, workshop facilitator, and a parent coach over the last 40 years. Wow. Kathryn has won many awards online teaching and mentoring early childhood educators internationally. Congratulations on those awards, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Kathryn regularly writes articles for parents and teachers published in magazines in India, New Zealand, America, and Australia. Kathryn is a proud mother of 4 children, and her aim is to help parents and educators give children the best possible start in life. Wow, that's a beautiful, what a beautiful purpose-driven thing that you are. You are so important. Our children, our future generations. Wow.
That's what I think too, Ali. So I think, those early years are so important, and they give the basis for, as children grow and develop and grow into adults, because we want to have our children as happy, productive, successful, joyful adults. So, what we do in those early years, sometimes it really helps to shape that. And that's not to say that if we get it wrong in those first few years, that's the end of it. That's not it at all. But it's, having that understanding about the importance of those early years and the foundations and the grounding that we give young children is really important. And that is my aim and my purpose, that I want to try and support anyone who is involved with young children, to give them the skills and the knowledge to be able to support young children in their positive growth and development throughout their lives, really.
Oh, wow, that really is a wonderful purpose you've got. And being in this space, this parenting, educating, early childhood education space for over the last 40 years, I'm wondering, you have tapped into this purpose quite an early age, because you look great. Would you mind sharing, is there a story behind how you've been so purpose-driven and passionate about early education, early childhood education?
Well, I don't really know what the reason is behind it, but I have a sense that it might be because of my own upbringing, really. And it's only been in recent times that I've shared this story about my birth and my own early childhood development, because I was always, I don't know, sort of a little embarrassed or felt a little, like I'm not really all that smart after all, even with all of the awards and accolades that I've received over the last 40 years or so. And my birth was a difficult birth, and my head was quite engorged with blood. And I was born in a little country town. And at that stage, there wasn't the specialists that are around these days, and so locally. So my parents jumped in an ambulance with me and were rushed to Brisbane, which is the closest capital city to our little town that was like nearly 3 hours away from Brisbane, when I was a baby. And the specialist looked at me and pretty much said to Mum and Dad that that there's no hope for this baby. I'm really sorry, but this baby is going to have such severe brain damage that she's going to be in an institution or she will die. So that's what my parents were told when, just after birth. I think I was like 2 or 3 days old. So you can imagine, as a parent, being told that about your baby. And I was the fourth child. So they'd had 3 healthy children, and then to be told this for their 4th baby, which must have been devastating for my parents. But anyway, Mum decided that they were going to take me home anyway, and what would be would be. So I went home with them, and my milestones were a little bit underdeveloped, so it took me a little longer to crawl and to walk and do all of those sort of milestone things, but I made it. And I had to have regular doctor checks, and they had to check my blood count until I was about 5. So I had fingerprints until I was about finger pricks until about 5 years of age. And I had to take iron supplements as well, which turned my teeth, my baby teeth, all brown, because at that stage it was a brown medicine that we had to take. But that was it. And then I just went to school, and I was the same as everybody else. And I've grown. Was successful at school, went to university. I've got numerous degrees, and here I am now, 58 years later, and I'm still going strong.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that story. That is very inspiring, and it just prompts me to say that I've heard many people over the years say that life's always happening for us, not to us, to bring us in line to our path. And I'm just wondering, well, it seems like there's some truth there to be coming from, your background right from those early beginning years, from the very beginning. And how?
Yeah, thanks, Ali.
So very inspirational compared, to show where you are now. So wow, that is fabulous. That is really a beautiful story. Thank you.
Well, thanks to my parents for not going with what the doctors said.
Yeah, and not giving up.
Yes,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes. I believe in miracles.
But that also prompted me to have a great interest in brain science. So a lot of the work I do is related to the brain and brain science, and the way we teach children and the way we talk to children and the way we manage children. It's all to do with brain science. So it sort of spurred me in that direction, I guess, and those early childhood years that are so pivotal to what happens in the rest of our lives. So I guess that's the inspiration. So that's the short answer of your question.
Oh, that's lovely. I think what a great intro leading into what we're going to be talking about today, which I'm very excited to hear your 4 parenting approaches. You're going to walk us through those. And so the first one being authoritarian. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, there are 4 parenting approaches that we all slip into and we all slip out of at times. So it depends on the situation. It depends on the context. It depends on how tired we are. If we're hungry, if the kids are hungry, it's contextual. But for the listeners, what I'd really like for you to do in this time is start thinking about what you do most of the time, because there are 4 approaches. And as parents, our parenting approach is usually a zigzag approach. It's not a straight line, because things change all the time, and we may be different with some of our children than other children if we have multiple children in the family. But by and by, we need to be relatively consistent in the way that we approach our parenting style. So you're right, Ali. The first one is the authoritarian one that I want to talk about. And I would just ask parents not to judge yourself when you're listening to these styles, but to be aware and just to listen and to self-reflect and see if you see yourself in any of these approaches. So authoritarian parents are usually quite strict, and they often say, in their own mind, they might say out loud, or in their own mind, they might say, kids should be seen and not heard, or they might say, do as I say because I said so. And it's a very strict regime almost. I've heard it described as the policeman approach, where there's hard and fast rules and you follow the rules no matter what. And, it's sort of my way or the highway. And really the rules are made by the parents, and it's the child's job to stick to those rules. And they're usually quite hard and fast. And sometimes there's not really any explanation of the rules. There's just, this is the rule and this is what you have to do. Which means for children, they don't feel as though they have any power. They feel disempowered. They just have to follow what the parents tell them to do. They can't question the rules. They can't discuss the outcome. They just have to do as they're told. They're not encouraged to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes. If they make a mistake, well, then they're punished because they haven't followed the instructions, or they're made to feel as though they're stupid. With that, children can become quite resentful, and they might toe the line, they might do it, but they build this resentment and they build this anger, and eventually that anger bubbles out, or children start to tell lies because that sort of keeps them safe, so they tend to do that so that they avoid punishment, and they feel quite restricted and hemmed in. Just a little story, by the way, when my own children were growing up and in those teenage years, and you said earlier that I've got 4 children and they're all in their sort of late 20s now, but in those teenage years we had some friends and they were quite authoritarian and they were very hard and fast, and they had 3 daughters, and I know the stuff that those girls used to get up to without their parents knowing, because there were so many rules at home. Once they got out to a sleepover or out and about a little bit more, they would act out like all the other girls were. Like, they weren't doing anything really bad, but in their family it was like shocking. So that was that real authoritarian style. So that sort of encourages children to be sneaky almost, and I don't think any of us really want that for our children. And authoritarian parents also tend to look for the results. So at school, they're looking for the A's. They're not looking for the effort and everything that went in behind getting that C or that B. They're looking for the results. And so they can be quite hard and fast about that, which is, a lot of pressure for children. So again, children find ways to manage that pressure. And it's not always in a positive way. So if you're feeling as though you might be too authoritarian, or somebody who is, just reflect on that and question, is there a need for you to be as hard and fast with the rules as you think it is? Is that really necessary? Do your children need those really strong rules, or could you talk things over with the children a little bit more and give them a little bit more power in the decision making of what happens at home?
Oh, that's really great. To make us parents aware of whether that approach is part of our parenting style. And I'm wondering too, just prompts a question, like when I look at how I was raised from, say, my dad, who was from 1 to 12, very strict. I remember my dad was pretty easygoing, but in the early days when we were growing up, because he wasn't allowed to leave the table until they'd finished all their food, he tried that on us. But it's interesting that they can, as a parent, could it be that they look at their parents and they take on their parent style, or perhaps do the complete opposite? So I think that wore off pretty quickly from my dad. He was way more laid back than his very strict upbringing. So would that be sort of something that us parents do? We take on a little bit of how our parents brought us up, and then what we liked about it or what we didn't, or is it a little bit innate as well, do you think?
Well, it's a great question. And, there is this thing about intergenerational beliefs and, the belief systems that you develop when you're young, which are really developed by watching your parents and seeing how they behave. And, they are our role models. And in those early years when we're developing, they are our world. So whatever our parents do, that's the way we do it. But, as we grow up and we get older and we become parents ourselves, we say, oh, I'm never going to say what my mother said. I'm never going to be like my father. And then when there's times of stress, when we're under pressure or we're tired, we hear those same words coming out of our mouths that our mother or our father used to say. And we said, I am never going to be like them. And yet here we are, exactly like them, because we go to default. And that's something that happens in our brains. We go to that safety that we know, and we just start responding in default. So that needs a lot of self-awareness to see that you're doing that, and then make some changes. If you don't want to be that way, you need to make some conscious changes around that. But it's definitely modeled by our parents to start with, and then it's reinforced by the experiences we have. It might be reinforced by our own background and even our cultures. We're a multicultural country, so different cultures have different expectations, the expectations of society. So children should all be perfect. That might be the belief in your society or your community or your family, or your parents, who modeled their parenting from their parents, who modeled their parenting from their parents. So, it sort of filters right down to us. until we become really self-aware and we make decisions about how we're going to parent. But still, when we're under pressure, we tend to go to default. And, you know, and that's what I mean. Parenting is a zigzag approach. It's not just a straight line. So it's just a matter of trying something, trying it, correcting as a parent, and just doing the best we can, because none of us get up in the morning and say, I'm going to be the worst parent I can today. Nobody does that. So things happen, and, you know, you've got to not beat yourself up about it and just think, okay, well, all right, today wasn't a great parenting day. I'm going to try again tomorrow.
Oh, they're words of wisdom. Yeah, that's great. So self-awareness, role modeling. And if we are really under a lot of stress, parents, I'm picking up that we might go to that default and that intergenerational, which is like a cycle. It could be a vicious cycle or a good cycle if you've got some really good parenting back up there of the generations.
Yeah, that's it. But it's fairly common that we try and make these conscious decisions not to be like our parents. Well, you know, once we've grown up and we look at our parents as people, not as just our parents, and reflect on our own childhoods, you know, it's natural that we would critique, I guess, and work out what's going to fit our lifestyle now, because obviously things change in each generation. So, yeah, it's a matter of self-awareness and just deciding how you want to bring up your family.
Yeah, great, wise words. Yeah, and it's sort of exponentially changing. Like they're not living, we're not living in the same world today as they were. That's absolutely for sure. But that's the authoritarian approach to parenting. So then we've got authoritative parenting approach. So how does that differ?
Yeah, they sound very similar, don't they?
Yeah, a little bit.
And they're spelt in a very similar way, but they couldn't be more different. So the authoritative style is really where parents are firm but fair. So they establish strict rules, but they allow a little bit of flexibility in different situations, and they allow children to question the rules, ask, well, why can't we do this? Why are we doing that? And they have like natural consequences. Well, you know, if you're not going to turn the TV off when I ask you to turn the TV off, well, then you won't be able to watch it tomorrow. So you make the choice. And so children are sort of almost given the power to make their own decisions, but within the parameters of the family expectations and the family rules. So in the authoritative style, the children's feelings are really considered, and rules are discussed with the children, and they value the effort. So, you know, going back to that example with the authoritarian parent, where the child gets an A and that's all the focus is on, with an authoritative parent, they might still be pleased the child's got an A, but they'll also recognise all of the study that's gone in and all the practice that's gone in to get to that A, or to get the B, or to get the C. So they value the child. So the relationship between the parent and the child is a little bit more friendly. It's a warmer relationship. The children feel a little safer. They feel like they can go to their parents and talk over things with them if there's a problem. Whereas with the authoritarian one, it's more like, oh, I'm not going to tell mum and dad because I might get into trouble. So, but with the authoritative, that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for the authoritative style because that's an open communication, but it's still firm, but it's fair. There's still rules, there's still boundaries, and it's, you know, it's about developing those warm relationships with our children as well, so that they know that they can come and talk to us, even though there might be consequences. It's also about explaining to children as they get older, particularly in the teenage years, and it's talking to them about, well, if you go to that party and you know those other children are going to be there and they're allowed to drink and you're not allowed to drink, so what's going to happen? What are you going to do if they offer you some alcohol and you're feeling really pressured to do it? What are you going to do? So you can have those conversations with them. Whereas, you know, if you're an authoritarian parent, you probably wouldn't let them go to the party in the first place. And if you did, it'd be a whole stack of rules, and you'd probably come and check on them halfway through the night to make sure they're not drinking. It's a lot more control. But what we want to do with the authoritative style is to empower children and assist them to make good decisions. so that they are learning. Because with all of our parenting, we've got to look at the big picture here, where we're training our children to be adults. So we want them to be problem solvers. We want them to be decision makers. We want them to sort of think ahead and be able to look after themselves, not be dependent on the rules that somebody else has put down for them.
That's brilliant. And I'm hoping I'm slotting into that authoritative.
Authoritative, I know.
Authoritative.
It's tricky, isn't it?
It is a little bit of a tricky one, isn't it? Because I don't want to be mistaken for that authoritarian. That was certainly not me. That is very great. That's wonderful, because I know we've got 2 more parenting styles to come now, which is the next one will be permissive. So it'll be really great to, after we finish the 4 parenting styles, to reflect back to that one, because that one sounded like that was the spot on one. As you say, we're working towards that. So for number 3 parenting approach, Kathryn, permissive parenting approach, how does that look like? What does that look like, sound like?
Okay, so the permissive style is more where there's really not many rules at all, and parents are quite lenient. There's not a lot of discipline. It's more, parents have the attitude that, kids will be kids, or boys will be boys, and what can you expect? They're just kids. And there's no real rules or boundaries. It's more like a friend role. Rather than being the parent, you want to be the friend. So you don't want to have some strict rules and consequences, because you don't want to alienate your friend. So it's not really a parenting role. It's more of a supportive friendship role, I guess, which means that there aren't any boundaries, and there aren't any rules, and there aren't, the children don't feel secure enough because there's no rules, and pretty much anything goes. Children are allowed to do what they want, so that means that they think all adults are like that. So when they go off to school, it's really difficult for them to respect authority, because they're not used to having an authoritarian figure that's giving them or setting boundaries or making rules and enforcing anything. So sometimes they will struggle academically because they're not used to having some sort of structure and being told what to do by another adult. As they get older, some children who are brought up in the permissive style find it really difficult to make decisions in life, because they haven't had any guidance and they haven't had any discipline in the early days. And discipline, I don't mean like smacking. I mean discipline as being disciplined, as in having control over what they're doing and having structure. So it's sort of open slather. So they have little commitment to and perseverance to stick with what they choose to do. So that's like the extreme. Now, of course, there's variations of all of this. Every style that I'm talking about, there's variations. So, I'm giving you a range of different possible behaviours that you might see in these particular approaches to parenting. And that's probably the extreme with the permissive style, that children just, do what they want. And if they're out late, that's okay. If they are doing something they shouldn't be doing, parents tend to talk about things before it happens, and then they've gone and done something. So they've gone and thrown a rock at somebody's window, and then parents will just talk about that. You shouldn't do that, and that's not very good, and we'll have to go and say sorry. But there's no real boundary, because the parents are wanting to be friends with the child rather than being firm and putting in those structures. And secretly, even though children whinge and whine about having rules and having boundaries and not being allowed out, and as teenage years have to be home by 10 o'clock, as much as they complain about all of that, they love it, because it makes them feel secure. It makes them feel somebody cares, somebody wants them, and there's a safety net for them. So in the permissive style, there's not so much of that. The parent is very much there. They love their children. All of these parents love their children, but they're very lenient, and they don't want to rock the boat. They're happy to let their children do whatever they want to do, and then they're just there to support them and pick up the pieces and help them afterwards.
Oh yeah, that's quite touching actually. It sort of really pulled on my heartstrings, different things there, and even that overall thing. I could almost really, it brings a tear for just that was a lovely reminder that all parents, we love our children, we want what's best for them. So it's just interpretation, and we really, it could be what we're doing is, maybe not the best for them, but we're, as you said earlier, Kathryn, we're doing the best we can. And it sort of wasn't like we had this little rule book when they came into the world, was it? But although there's some beautiful books written and experts like yourself, parenting coaches, which we call upon. And that's another reminder too, when we have parents, it's never too late to change. Or, if you're a permissive parent, you're a little bit lenient, maybe you sort of try to toughen up, not toughen up a little bit, it's just sort of like introduce boundaries and protect them. And as you say, definitely a child, that's what deep down they want. They want to know that you care. And I feel we're here to protect them, and to protect them, we need to set boundaries. And when I look at parents, not on a, I don't really mean to judge them, but you can definitely see the behaviour of their children do reflect. Would you say, would that be a truth in that statement, that our children seem to be a reflection of the parenting approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if there's no boundaries, children tend to have no boundaries. And even with a permissive parent, they might make some rules, but they might have 3 or 5 rules stuck on the fridge, but they don't actually enforce them. So they're sort of like suggestions. They're not really rules. And Ali, I do really want to stress that we all are doing the best we can, and we all love our children. As I said earlier, none of us get up in the morning and say, I'm going to be the worst parent I can possibly be today. We all want to get up and try to do the best we can for our children, because we do love them. But things get in the way. Life gets in the way. Sometimes other people get in the way. Work gets in the way. There's a whole range of things, and we're only human, and we get tired too. And sometimes it's easier just to give in, and we all do that. I've done that too. It's just like, oh, can't be bothered. Yeah, all right, just go do it. And then later you think, when you're feeling better, you think, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that, or I'll change things tomorrow. But you do what you can at the time, because we're all human, and that's okay.
That is okay. And you can always revisit. You can say, oh, actually, when I was telling you about that it's okay to go to that party on the beach, I've actually had time to think about it. I'm not comfortable with it because there's no parental, no one watching out for you. So, how about we change that up a little bit, and you can have the party here instead, or at our house, and, But yeah, so you can always revisit, can't you? Go back.
Absolutely. And talk to your child. So that's when an authoritative parent would do that, then talk to their child and say, what, I've had time to think about this. And if you go to the party on the beach, what would happen if? How are you going to get out of a situation if? Now I was at a hairdresser's a few weeks ago, and they were telling a story about things that were happening on the beach at a party that they'd heard about. Hairdressers know everything. Everyone tells everything to their hairdresser. And she was telling me this story, and I won't go into it, but that was one of those cases where it went really bad really quickly. And if your child was at that situation, if you hadn't have had that conversation, well, what would you do if some bigger kids came and went to the party, or a fight broke out? What would you do if? And have those conversations so that your child is prepared. They have an idea of what they're going to do. They have their phone on them. They have you on speed dial, or whatever it might be. You put in place things to keep them safe, and those rules and those boundaries. It's the same with young children. It might not be the party on the beach, but it could be going to play at someone else's house. What would you do if? And just have those conversations with your children so that they have a wider understanding of the world, so that then they can make good decisions in whatever situation they're in.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And it's sometimes there's people that even just with what's going on in the world today, not to get into it too much, but I'm the type of person that I would like to prepare for what might happen, and then you hope for the best and expect the best. So for sure, I would have run through scenarios with my kids at whatever ages it is, whether they're a young child going to their friends' places, because I was very big on my kids not watching M+ movies before the age of 15. That was just something that I think that I might have inherited that from my mum, and that made sense to me because I know me, I know this brain here. And I think that, as the brain learns in pictures, once they get images in their heads, whatever nasty stuff's out there, we can't erase that. So I was very particular with nanny software, and, you know, I encouraged the kids to come to my house because I knew what they were watching. And I remember my young kids back in the day were under 15. They watched Lord of the Rings. And I was like horrified. I didn't watch the movie myself, but I just knew that it was, I think it was M15 if I was correct. But yeah, so it's very, very important.
It is, and it makes, it deepens and strengthens those neural pathways in the brain, or those visual images. So, being mindful of that, being mindful what your children are watching and what they're seeing, and making a decision, a parenting decision, an adult decision about what is appropriate for your children and what isn't. When my children were young, I wouldn't even allow them to watch Monsters, Inc., and because I thought it was a horror movie, and it wasn't till years later they told me, no, Mum, it's a PG. We should have watched it. But that was my rule.
Yes, well, you might have been not quite correct there, but at least they know that you protected them and set boundaries. So that's a nice story. Well, that was the permissive approach, and that was it's really very awesome content that you're sharing with us today. Now we've got, moving on to our fourth parenting approach, is uninvolved, the uninvolved parent approach. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like for our parents and our kids?
Well, it's not a very flattering term, is it, to be called an uninvolved parent? And really it just means a parent who has their hands off. They're not as involved as the other parenting styles. And parents that are uninvolved might be thinking that it's up to their child to do things like homework or follow up on responsibilities. It's up to them. That's their problem. Or it might be, I don't know where my child is, and it's not really my concern. They'll come home when they're ready. Or it might be spending time with your own child. It might be very limited time, and it might be for a number of reasons. It might be, you might have a lot of work to do. You might not be well. There might be other situations or conditions that sort of impact on the amount of time that you can spend with your child. You could be feeling quite overwhelmed and just not able to cope with building relationships with your child at that time. And that happens sometimes. Because of that busyness and because of that being distracted, I guess, and not being hands-on, children feel a little neglected. Children feel like they're growing up, or they're bringing themselves up, and they have a lot of responsibilities, and it's up to them to follow through, and it's up to them to make sure they got their homework. It's up to them to make sure that their bag's packed and they've got some lunch the next day. So basically the uninvolved parent makes sure that all of the basic needs are covered. So the child has food, there's somewhere to live, all of those basic needs are covered, but there's not any warm relationship building because the parent's not able to do it, or maybe not interested in doing it. And that happens with some of us as well. And that's no judgment there, but at times we're just not interested in what our kids are doing. So with that, they lack discipline. Children tend to lack discipline because there's no boundaries, because the parents, aren't capable of of putting boundaries in place. They don't really care, where they are. They can sort of come and go as they please. So there's not real discipline in the household. And again, I don't mean discipline as in smacking. I mean a disciplined attitude. And so children might make some poor life choices, and maybe get involved in things that perhaps they shouldn't be involved in. They might struggle academically because, again, they've got a lot of burden. They're looking after themselves, basically. All of the responsibility of taking care of themselves is really on them. And they grow up not trusting others because they don't have that parent that they can go to, because the parent is distracted or too involved with something else. So they can't go to the parent and ask for support, help, boundaries. So they don't trust others very easily. So they grow up with a low self-esteem often, because young children develop their self-esteem by the attitude and by the interactions that they have with other people. So how others see you is how you then see yourself. So if the parents aren't taking the time to interact with their child, well, you sort of feel like, oh, well, I'm not really worth it. So it can be very hard time. So they can become quite withdrawn. They can become quite anxious, and in later years, it's very difficult for them to develop warm relationships with others. So that uninvolved style, whilst it isn't all that flattering, that name, it really just means that the parent who is distracted and who has so many things going on that they're not really involved in their own child's life.
Yeah, that one actually pulls on my heartstrings a little bit too. And again, reminding parents that they love their children. And an uninvolved parent could look like a busy, successful entrepreneur that's providing for them, say, with a college education and a fancy car to drive, for example, yet they're not like actually interacting with and building relationships like in the physical form, emotionally, and being there for them in, all areas of their life throughout their life. So it doesn't mean that they don't love them. It's just that they may not be there. With technology,
Absolutely.
Kathryn, I guess when I have a rule with one of my children, I love that Greg Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages.
Oh, yeah, great, isn't it?
It would be nice, probably another podcast for that one.
Yeah.
It's pretty deep. But it's what I've learned from, say, my third child, my youngest one, quality time. So even if I was, say, on the computer, I'm busy, entrepreneur, what have you, and they come into the room, what I choose to do is go, oh, can you just wait a sec? I've just finished this email. And then I close the computer, then give them undivided attention. So we can actually work towards, if you were an uninvolved parent, in, say, a busy sense, overwhelmed, and it comes in different forms. Yeah, you could just, what could we do? What tips could we say to those parents? Because you can change to start practicing new behaviours so that we can, not bring up a poor, neglected child that's low in self-esteem because of an uninvolved parent. So that's so sad.
And I think your analogy there of the executive that's just really busy doesn't mean they don't love their child. Of course they do, but they're doing their best to provide everything for the child. But children really want time, and they really want to build that warm relationship, and they want to see that they're valued. And your notion there of active listening is a really important one, that we actually do stop and we turn and we make eye contact and we actively listen. We don't just hear the children when they're talking to us, we actually listen, and then use empathy. So, it sounds like you're really worried about this situation, or yeah, I can see that you're really upset about what has happened. So it's using that empathy so that children understand that you really have connected with them. And that's part of that authoritative style that we talked about, the second style that we talked about, the one where we really want to aim for if we can. So if you feel that your parenting is reflected in any of these styles, now that's okay, because we all go in and out of it. But what we're aiming for is that consistent authoritative approach. And I've just got some top tips around all of that. So if you'd like me to share some.
I'd love you to. Thank you, Kathryn. That would be wonderful for our parents listening.
Well, the first one, Ali, is self-care. Look after yourself. You remember the days where we used to be able to get on a plane and fly somewhere? And the and the instruction was to put your own face mask on first with the airflow, and then look after the people next to you, your children, whoever else you're with. It's the same with this. Self-care first. Do something nice for you first. Get up 10 minutes earlier and go and sit and have a cup of tea out in the yard by yourself and gather your thoughts for the day. Make sure you're not disturbed for 15 minutes and go and have a bath, or just go for a walk by yourself, or take the kids sometimes if you want to. But it's this self-care. Do a bit of meditation if you want to. There's this great app called Insight Timer that I often use. It's fantastic, and it's got a whole range of different meditations, guided meditations, or just music if you meditate on your own. It ranges from 5 minutes to an hour, whatever you want. It's really good, and it's free. And do something like that when you wake up in the morning or when you're going to bed at night. So that's self-care. Treat yourself every now and again, because parenting is a big job, and if you have an outside job as well, that's a double whammy. And then lately we've had our children home with us, and we've been homeschooling, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on. So it's really important that we don't beat ourselves up. So as parents, we're doing the best we can, but we also need to take really good care of ourselves, which is not selfish. That's actually the best thing you can do, because then you're able to care for other people. So that's the first one that I want to talk about. So that self-care is really important. The next thing is when you're creating some rules or some boundaries in your household, make sure the boundaries are fair, not unrealistic, and not things that the children won't be able to achieve on a consistent basis. So if one of your rules is always have your room tidy, well, that's a little unrealistic. I don't know about you, Ali, but at the moment my room's not tidy. And, you know, it's unrealistic to always have your room tidy and spotless. That's like being in the army. We've got to live in our houses, and we've got to live in and be comfortable, and kids have to have a space in the house. I'm not saying that it needs to be messy, but it needs to be tidy. But if you have that bit of flexibility.
And not always. My mum used to say always is a big, strong word. Always.
Always
like,
is.
Not
it
possible,
is. No, it's not possible. That's like being perfect all the time. And none of us can do that. So be realistic and have fair boundaries. And when you're setting up rules in your house, don't have a whole stack of them. Have maybe 3 rules. So it might be, and word them positively. So in your house, if you don't want the kids to run through the house, you want them to walk, well, that's what the rule is. Walk inside. If you want your children to speak in a quiet voice or speak with courtesy, that's the rule. Use a quiet voice inside. So you're listing what you do want, not what you don't want. So if you say to children when you're developing rules, if you say don't run, they go, okay, I'll hop, I'll skip, I'll do cartwheels, I'll do whatever I want. But I'm following the rules, because the rule is don't run. So word your rules in a positive way so that it's clear for the children, particularly for young children, what you do want. The other thing is, think about our day. There's 24 hours in the day. We've all got 24 hours. Generally, we have 8 for sleeping. Generally, there's 8 for working. And then we've got 8 hours left over. Now, in that 8 hours that's left over, make some time for your child to actively listen, that we just talked about. Engage with them, build those relationships, talk about the day. Instead of a big general question like, how was your day? Maybe say, what made you laugh today? What was something that made you smile today? Or who did you talk to today that made you think really hard about something? You know, ask deeper questions so that you start to understand how they're thinking, and it creates a conversation then. And having that eye contact with them and building those relationships. I read some research not so long ago, and it said that once a week we should take each one of our children off for like even just 10 minutes and say, so if it's you and I, Ali, and you know, you and my daughter, I would say, Ali, let's you and I go and have just a little bit of time together. Come out in the garden with me and help me plant these new seedlings, just you and me. So we'd go out, and as we're planting, we'd be talking, and it'd just be a closeness because we're sharing an experience. It's a shared experience just you and I have. And then at the end of it, we'd go inside and I'd say, thank you, Ali, for giving me some time. That was so nice to spend that 10 minutes with you. Thank you. That was just for you and me. And that's Ali's time. And then the next child, maybe the next day, and the next child, the next day, so that you had that special time with them each day.
Love that.
And in classrooms, I say the same thing to teachers, but because there's more children, I'd say just 1 minute a day, and ask the children about, how's that new baby that's in your family? Or how are those new shoes? Are they still making blisters on your feet? You know, ask them questions that, you know, show that you're interested in them, not just what they're doing, but you're actually interested in them. So use some of that 8 hours that we have every day. Well, we hope we've got 8 hours every day. Use some of that time to build those relationships with your children. And it can just be, you know, during doing anything with them, or it can be specific time where you make that time just for that child. That's a really important one.
That's beautiful. That's profound, that one. And just reminding us that we have 8 hours. We only need to spend 10 minutes with each child, and depending on how many kids you have, will be a profound influence on their growth and development going forward. That's beautiful. Love that.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be all in the one day. You can spread it out over the week. So if you've got multiple children. The other thing is to set up some routines in your house. So that's security for children. That makes children know what's coming next. There's no surprises. It helps them feel secure, makes them feel like they know what's coming up next. They know somebody's got their back because, there's a routine. And also some other traditions that are really important. So it might be that you always eat dinner around the table. So maybe, you come and go for breakfast, you come and go for lunch, maybe, depending on your household. But for dinner, you always sit around the table. And if your habit in your family is to sit in the living room watching the TV with your dinner on your lap, if that's your tradition and that's what you normally do, that's okay. But at least once a week, have dinner around the table. That's actually really important for a number of reasons, because it bonds and solidifies the family unit so that we're sitting all around the table looking at each other to start with. And it's also a great opportunity to talk about things that have happened in the day or things that are coming up. And not only just that part of it, it gives children the opportunity to talk about anything that's bothering them. It is also setting up the tradition of talking to your parents, so that as children get older and something happens and they need to talk to you, they know that they can, because all their lives they've always talked to you around the kitchen table. So it's sort of like opening up those teenage year conversations, even when children are quite young. It's setting those things in place.
That's really lovely. And what a beautiful tip. And that's where you can find a mum or a dad in the kitchen. Like, you've got them in one place, haven't you? And the teen or the young child can just lean over the kitchen bench, munch on the carrots. I remember doing that with my mum, and raw cabbage, and you chat to your mum or your dad or whoever's in the kitchen cooking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a nice bonding thing. As I said before, it's a shared experience. So it's something that draws you together and you've got that common bond then. And then I guess the last thing is to be consistent with whatever your approach is, and be fair, and remember what your rules and what your boundaries and what your parenting approach looks like through the eyes of your child. Beautiful. So that's a really important one too. We're aiming toward authoritative parenting, the second one, but we all bob in and out of the others, and that's okay, because we're only human, and that's what happens. But, to make sure that we're looking after ourselves so that we can then look after our family and make these decisions with a level head, because we are taking care of ourselves, and knowing too that we have a background of parenting. We've seen our parents parent our whole lives. And so we have that background, and we have experiences that have either reinforced that or taken those impressions away. But each day we just do the best that we can with all the information that we have. And I'm hoping that today has been an opportunity to get a little bit more information so that you can make informed parenting decisions. And this is often what I talk about when I coach parents and coach couples in their parenting journey, I guess, because things happen along the way, and some clients are long-term clients, and some just need to have a few questions, and they just need a little bit of direction, and off they go. And that's something that I love to do, because I feel like I'm giving back a little. So I hope that's all been helpful.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kathryn Murray. It is absolutely so generous of you to share this time with our listeners today for all parents. And it was just beautiful just to hear about those 4 different approaches and how we weave in and out, remind ourselves, as we've mentioned many times, that we're all coming from a place of love. We love our kids and we want the best for them. And just that little tiny bit with that summary that you summed up there, it just prompted that, in a relationship, mum and dad being together, or even if they're separated in different homes, the different parenting beliefs from each parent, that would be another whole podcast on its own, I would imagine. So we talked about our intergenerational, the cycle of our parents, how that's been handed down. And then you've got, when you're in a relationship with your partner, well, then they've got a different intergenerational cycle of parenting, haven't they? So that's just, I would think that would be, just from my own experience, as a commonality of the disagreements that parents have about raising their children, which are both their children.
Absolutely, and I have some clients overseas that I coach on Zoom, and there's one couple that I'm thinking of. Started off with just the mum, and then we realised that it's actually, the dad needs to be in these conversations as well, because they did have different ideas. They both were trying to do the right thing, and they both had different ideas about what the right thing was. So then we had to work and work out sort of some common ground and have them agree on, well, this is the approach that we're both going to take. Whether we fully agree or not, this is our approach that we're going to take. So it is very much that, Ali, whether, even if parents are separated and they're in different homes, children are pretty good at working out what are the rules here and what are the rules over here. So, and again, it's just that consistency and making sure that children know what the rules are in the various homes that they live in, and if parents are together, what the rule is in that home as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting journey, and it is a journey, and we learn the whole way along, and I just love to facilitate that journey. So
that's lovely. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So like with parenting coaching and parenting both parents at the same time, where can people find more about you if they needed to call on your coaching work, facilitating to help them with their parenting approach?
Well, gosh, that would be my honour to be involved in someone's family in that role. If people want to find me, you can go to my website, which is Future Strong Education. Just Google that, Future Strong Education. And on the front page, there's a calendar link, and you can click on that and you can have 30 minutes free with me. And from that conversation, we can work out, I'll give you some tips throughout that conversation, but then we can work out if we can work together in a more organised way, so that I can support your family and try and help you with your parenting. Because it's, back in the old days, there was a village, wasn't there? There was all the grandparents and the extended family, and everyone would raise the children, but it's not like that anymore. So, I mean, if I can help to support, that's what I love to do.
Oh, and it sure shows, Kathryn. You really love this. This is definitely your sole purpose here. Shine through well and truly. And I think there are a lot of parents that probably need, we need to wrap this up now, but just with what's going on in the world, we could probably, might be tempted not to bring this up, but there's some serious issue going on in the world. And I know from my own personal experience, not my own, in my own home, but from the people that I'm tuning into and the families I'm speaking to, there's a real issue about the experimental vaccine. Parents strongly wants it, strongly against it, incredible sides. And now there's talking of, divorce. Like, I'm thinking that would be a really sad thing. So I'm just, I think that parent coaches, they're going to be needed even more so than before, I think, because there's some serious issues that families are confronted with right now as we film this podcast. So I wish them all the best.
I think the light has been shone on any little fractures within a relationship. The light has been shone on that now, given the situation that we have. So, and unfortunately, the children are in the family as well. So we need to make sure that the children are sort of protected in some way, so that they have a good chance of developing in a positive way, so that they can be happy, productive, wonderful adults that we want them to be.
That's right. And that's the aim, isn't it? So, thank you, Kathryn. Dr. Kathryn Murray, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Lessons I Don't Teach in School. And this one was specifically for parents. And thank you so much for sharing your 4 parenting approaches, bringing that to our awareness. And we probably won't need to go through it, but that authoritative parent is what we're working towards. So thank you again. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, and those lovely tips at the end: self-care and dining with our kids and having quality time with our kids. It's most important. Thank you.
Well, my great pleasure, and I wish everybody lots of parenting success.
Me too. Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you so much.